Brilliant. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us this evening for a Novella in Flash showcase. This was my idea, so thank you very much for coming along and supporting it. Part of the reason that I wanted to run this event tonight is because we released this book earlier in the year, which is Novelette in Flash, but for the purposes of today, we're saying Novella in Flash. Unfortunately, we were unable to have a launch at the time it was released, and I'm really pleased that two of the authors are with us this evening. The third author just isn't a fan of like social media and Zoomy things and things like that, so that's why they're not here, but all three stories in the book are fabulous. It's going to be a really informal event, and I'm not, poor participants didn't even realise I'm not going to do a Q&A. I've just said to each reader, I would just like you to spend 10 minutes telling us a little bit about yourself, about your novella in Flash, whatever it is that you want to share with us. They might read from it, they might not. It's a surprise. I don't know either. The reason that I wanted to do this is because I don't come from a professional creative writing background. I don't have a creative writing degree or anything like that. Everything I've achieved is from being self-taught and attending courses and workshops. And I always think I just want to break down those barriers a little bit, like writing is for everyone. It's nice to have transparency and to see how people go about things and like take a little bit of the sort of mystery away. So I'm quite excited to see what everyone comes up with. I'm going to monitor the chat, and I am going to post links to people's books in the chat so that you can have a look at them as they're talking. If any questions come up, you can pop them in the chat, or we can wait until the end of the hour and then you can just indicate somehow that you have a question. Okay, so we are going to start off with Tom O'Brien.
Hello, hi. So I'm Tom. Thanks, Gaynor, for organising this. Great idea. I'm going to be reading a little bit from Straw Gods, which is my debut novella in Flash, but I've been lucky enough to have two others published, one with Retreat West, so it's nice to be here. That was a Homemade Weather. I'm in there as the title track, but also there's a story from Donna Greenwood and Ian O'Brien as well, so I'm in good company. And then I had a third novella in Flash published by Ad Hoc Fiction, which is One for the River, currently being blurred out by Zoom. But so I've been very, very lucky. The middle one, Homemade Weather, is a novelette in Flash, but as Gaynor said, for tonight, it's a novella in Flash. It's just to do with the length. All the principles are basically the same. I was thinking for the readings I'm going to do, they're just short little micros, maybe one longer. But following on from the back of a workshop I did during the recent Flash Fiction Festival, and also a course I co-ran with Amanda on writing novella in Flash, I thought maybe just a small craft element. And the thing that was on my mind when I was reading through it, and I haven't actually read these in ages, but was the idea of using things or places that recur in a novella in Flash, and how it's a useful tool to work in a way that isn't always easy in a novella in Flash when it's not chapter by chapter. You can't really refer back to other parts of the story very easily because they're all meant to stand alone. But if you have someone bump into the same thing once, twice, three times, or the same place, perhaps, it can be familiar and grounding for the reader. They say, oh, we're back in the kitchen again, or we're in that car, or we're driving to Dublin again, or whatever it is. Or if there's an item they use. And so that was something I knew I'd done, but I had to go searching for examples, and I found one in Straw God. I actually found two separate ones. So I thought with that in mind, I'd do some reading so that maybe there's a sort of a focus to that, because they are tiny little pieces, which is often the way with novella in Flash. So there's a sort of a twin set to start with. I'm just going to read the micros for those, and maybe a longer one afterwards. That's a separate piece of writing. The main character in Straw Gods is Rosa, a widow who's struggling with grief, struggling to the point where she sees her husband as a ghost. She's just in the early days of grief. Having said all of that, I wrote it in the first person. So when you're listening to this, it's not a balding, bearded Irish man. It's a young widow who's speaking in the I. So if you can make that leap, then well done you. So this first one is several uses for music. I turned the handle on the record player 20 times. The number remembered from when Agatha and I would play the same record over and over as girls. The player was old even then, and the records we played are long gone. But the rule was 20 times, enough to get to the end of the song, but not so much to overwind the spring. We danced and chased each other around the room until our mother told us to shut up or she would take that damn thing away. I placed the heavy needle on the circling record, and the simple bass notes played, the repeated piano melody, and the violins so wise and slow. This was a record Matteo brought me, a kind of music I'd never heard. The same instruments made it as the old boring stuff we made fun of, but it didn't sound old. It was for dancing and grown-ups, and love and seduction, and now I knew, for loss. So that's one small piece, and then something of a matching one later on in the story, or in the book. This one is called Click, Click, Click. The record wound down when the needle click, click, clicked against the final groove, getting slower and slower as the spring weakened. I lifted it and put it back in its cradle and cracked the vinyl in half against the table. The rituals that guided my husband back to me had failed me, and I had to find new ones. I took the piece of paper I'd written on and held it close to the candle flame, though not quite touching. I could only do so much, and that was more than I could bear. It would catch fire, or it would not. The hope brought a sob, and that sob shuddered the paper and flame close enough to marry. The agony of losing Matteo burned me as I watched the paper he'd brought me curl, and my words of us with it. Even the flame biting my fingers was not as painful. But in the end, I had to let go, since there was nothing left to hold. So those two small pieces both feature the record player, thank you. And they allowed me to do quite a lot of, as well as being stories that had to work in their own right, but they allowed me to do a lot of mechanical things. I could bring in Agatha, her sister, refer to her childhood, and then later on I could show her moving on a little in her journey through the book, in that first it soothes her, and then it's not doing it anymore, that she's moved past that stage of grief. So that was just the idea that that there's that sort of element that we can use with Novella in Flash. That's, you can use it in any book, obviously, or in any story. It's a common thing to revisit, but it does that little bit of extra heavy lifting when you're saying, I can't go back and sort of mention chapter 4 or something like that. So I have one other piece then that's a little longer. And this one is much more direct in that Rosa is thinking about a particular element. This one also has a twin much later on in the story, but you'll have to buy the book if you want to find out why the trunk is so important. So this story is called The Trunk. I sat in front of the locked trunk while the storm blustered outside like a fat drunk. An iron bar lay on my bedroom floor between me and that lock. Every day in the first year after my husband died, I'd wanted to open the trunk, to get closer to whatever secrets he kept in there, but I didn't. Not through pride or respect, but because it burned too hot. My nerves were so raw I struggled to touch the black wood of the chest. Never mind the lock. Never mind force it open. Later, with Matteo near again, I didn't need it as much, and he would see if I broke it open. More than that, it might stop him coming back. I had lost Matteo, just like the first year, a howling void worse than any storm. Every day he took the key with him, even on the day he never came back. That was for a reason, but why should we have secrets, then or now? We were husband and wife, we were lovers. I recoiled from the thought I'd been a widow longer than a wife, but used it to lift the bar and slot it into the circle that held the lock. With my foot against the chest, I leaned back, worried about scoring the old wood as I levered against it. But it didn't take long before I didn't care. I needed to see what was inside this box. I struggled to slide, much less lift. My heart raced from the exertion of forcing the old rusted lock and the fearful excitement of what I would find. I'd never seen Matteo put anything in there or take anything out, though the lock and key creaked and the lid moaned when he lifted it, alone in the room. When I asked him what was in it, he would tease me with, "Wouldn't you like to know?" And oh, nothing at all. One night, rum drunk from Hector's bar, he answered, saying, "That trunk is me. I am that trunk," but turned it into, "I am that drunk," and I allowed myself to be distracted. Something cracked. The lock was unbroken, but the metal panel it attached to gave way. I fell back, slamming my hip against the bed, and sat looking at the trunk I didn't want to open. Now it was free, I wanted the lock back in place. I'd spent hours looking at it, wondering what secrets he kept hidden from me in there. How wrong it was for me to look, how foolish to not. I'd wanted clues to who he was, to understand him, but now I wanted there to be a trace of him. I lifted the lid before I lost my nerve and saw that Matteo had been telling the truth. The chest, for all its weight, was empty. So, and again, thank you. And again, that one has a sister piece later on in the proceedings, but I'd be spoiling my own book if I said how that came to be. So yeah, that's my little piece on Novella in Flash. Back to you, Gaynor. I have no idea how much time has passed.
It was perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing those pieces with us and that little
Thank
insight about an idea for a book.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, so we're over to Suda now.
Hello, and thank you, Gaynor, for organizing this. I think it's time we got some writers that do Novella and Flash together. So this is awesome. I honestly did not start this as a Novella and Flash. This is not how it began. I started with a Flash, which got picked up at Split Lip, and the character wouldn't let go. She just lingered around, and I felt like I need to expand on her story, or in other words, she had more to tell me. So I started writing a second chapter with the same character, and then it became a third, and so I kept going until I thought her story was finished, at least in that time period. So this is a story of a graduate student who comes to the United States from India, and it follows the trajectory of that 1 year in university and all of the things that she experiences. So it is about the same character, but the situations that she's placed in are different, and not necessarily sequential or not exactly similar, but it comes together as a whole by the end of the story. At least I'd like to think so. So that's how this Novella and Flash started. It really did start as a Flash story that wouldn't let go, and I felt compelled to write a longer story about the character. So I will read, this is the book, and it's called Things I Can't Tell Amma, and it was published by Ad Hoc, and I will read the first chapter. March 27th, 1981. I twist the curly wire connecting the rotary phone's receiver to its base. My first call to India from 9,000 miles away. Amma will say, "This call must be costly. Write letters except when there's news." She'll ask if I'm eating and sleeping. Then, as an inveterate matchmaker, she'll push the eminently suitable Mrs. Pye's son in California. There are things you can tell your mother, and there are things you can't. I can tell Amma that the traffic in America is orderly and quiet, that I open a bank account and get my phone connection in 1 day, that I can use an amazing new device, the automated teller machine, to withdraw money instead of going to the bank. I can't tell her that my flight arrives late, that I take a cab from the airport at 11 p.m., that the apartment office is closed, leaving me no place to go, that Theo, a young American wearing metal rim glasses and what she would consider inappropriate faded denim shorts, offers to let me stay with him, that I sit outside the office all night, that I watch male students in togas, fake Greeks in white sheets tied around their shoulders, cavort to loud music across the street, that I wait there until morning when people walk past me, as if a travel-worn Indian woman settled on her suitcases is an everyday occurrence, until Theo, with the metal rim glasses, hands me a mug of lukewarm black coffee and asks if I'd like to freshen up. That he says, "I don't have a gun, I promise," with a sparkly smile. Or that I run my tongue over slimy teeth. March 29th, 1981. My apartment is next to Theo's. With an ear against the wall, I listen to his television. His dishes clatter over the sound of canned laughter. I calculate the hours: breakfast in India, time for hot idlis with chutney, or peanut-laden aval upma. When I dial home, the phone rings and rings. Amma will ask why I haven't called Mrs. Pai's son, then contradict herself, ask why I'm wasting dollars. It's always easier to lie. I prepare to say his phone must be out of order. I organize my information. I can tell Amma that the grocery stores here are massive, that I can get everything except Indian spices, that I crave her cooking, that I can hear the radio over invisible speakers in the stores, that the phone company's advertisement asks us to reach out and touch someone, that it seems like such a nice thing to do, that my studio apartment is tiny and spare, a twin bed, desk, chair, that my department is half a mile away, that I've been clocking the walk so I can get to class on time, that I bought myself a plasticky jacket because it's cold here in March, that I have to train my ears to understand American English, that I'm confused about the spellings here, that tomorrow is the first day of the quarter, first day of class. I can't tell her that Theo sees me walking to the grocery store, that he offers me a lift in his car, chipped blue paint and noisy, that the woman on his car radio sings, "Call me," that he laughs, sparkling again, and says, "Hop in," that I decline and end up trudging back with heavy grocery bags draped on either arm. March 30th, 1981. I ring home for the third time in 4 days. The phone does not connect. While I try again, I decide if she answers, I'll preempt Amma and say, "Mrs. Pai's son doesn't answer his phone." I can then tell Amma about Dr. E in communications class. That is, annihilation sounds like annihilation, that I have lunch at the student union, which is big and loud, that they have loads of unfamiliar foods, potato salad, macaroni and cheese, bagels and cream cheese, that there are many television sets, that giggly girls at my table watch a show called General Hospital, that a blanket of silence drops when the television screen changes to breaking news, when newscasters announced someone shot the president of the country. And that, I can announce, is the big, shocking news. I can't tell her that Theo is in the student union, that he slides in next to me, that he drinks cola and squeezes a yellow condiment into his many-layered sandwich, that he catches me staring at his frayed backpack, ready to snap with the weight of his contents, that he grins and starts to unzip his backpack. And at that moment, they tell us a gunman shot President Reagan. That Theo reaches for my hand, that I gulp and gulp, that the giggly girls are silent for 2 minutes before they start talking about General Hospital again. Nor can I tell Amma that the phone company's jingle repeats in my mind and repeats, that there's an echoey silence at the other end of the line, that I understand the Indian telephone company must have disconnected her line because of an unpaid phone bill, that I must accept she's more miles away than I can count, that I want to tell her everything. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I love the title of your book, and I love the refrain as it came through in that piece. That's so, is that the first piece in the book?
Yes, it is. It's the first chapter.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Debbie now. Debbie?
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks for doing this, Gaynor. Thanks for the opportunity for us to come and read our novellas in Flash. Mine is only about love. I don't know if you can see it with my filter on. It's from Fairlight Books. And it was kind of, I had the idea for it when I realised I was writing a lot of flashes about my dad's Alzheimer's, and then being taken into a home and visiting him, and my mother visiting him and all the things that were going on then. I suppose it helped me at the time. And I decided to write something that I could enter into the Bath Novella in Flash Award, because my previous novella, The 1025, which has since been published out of Chester University, that was actually shortlisted in the Bath Novella in Flash Award. So I was quite encouraged. I wrote only about love and sent it, really buoyed up by the fact that I was shortlisted the year before, and it never even made the long list. So I thought, oh, okay. So I was trying to find places that I could send it to. I sent it to a couple of places. It was being, declined. And then Fairlight said they loved it. And could I send them the rest of it? And I was like, oh dear, there is no rest of it. This is 10,000 words. This is all you're getting. There's a sort of, I think, a bit of misunderstanding along the way, miscommunication. So they said to me, don't worry, just take your time and double the word count. We need at least 20,000 words. So I thought, well, I was really excited about it. So they said, take all the time you want, but I wanted to do it almost immediately. So that's all I did day and night. I think it took me about a month to come up with another 10,000 words, which I found quite easy, actually. I found other flashes that I'd written that fit in, and I just wrote some new pieces as well. So I sent the 20,000 words back to them, and they said they loved it still and wanted to publish it, so the rest is history. So the book's obviously based heavily on my experience of my dad being ill and his eventual passing away, and some of the chapters are based loosely on his life, but it is a fictional family and the situations are fictional. It's about a regular family and a regular man with lots of faults, as we all have. It's told in multiple voices as well, different tenses, different points of view, to give the feeling of a family and all its colours, I suppose, and the way that the different members of the family saw the story, Frank's life. So I want to read you a few chapters, 5 of them, but don't worry, 3 of them are micros, and then there's 2 slightly longer ones. But I will, if Gaynor starts waving at me or doing something, then I'll stop. But the first one I want to read is, this was actually, it won the ad hoc fiction weekly competition back in the day. And this is from the beginning of the book. And it's called Breaking Dad. Through the crackled panel of the door, you see him lying at the foot of the stairs, a grisly painting in mosaic, blue of the pajamas he's been wearing since Thursday, white of the skin that never sees sunshine, and crimson of something terrible up near his head. The picture is all joined together like the tiles on an ancient temple's floor, beautiful but damaged. Yesterday, he'd been more difficult than usual, said that without her, he didn't know what to do with himself. Every morning he got out of bed and just wanted to die. You shrugged it off. He's always been melodramatic. even before the heavy curtain came to lock down his memories. Mum is in hospital and your only job was not to break Dad while she was gone. You fumble with your key in the door, your heart pounding. And the second one is when Frank meets his future wife, Liz, and this is called The Future. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed them tighter in his big palm. They were lost in there. It made him feel good, her protector. Not that she needed protecting from what he'd seen of her so far. Fierce she was. When he told her he didn't dance, she told him she would see her dance partner, Donald, twice a week. And when they were at the Majestic on Fridays and dancing non-stop, he wasn't to get jealous and start doing any of that macho nonsense. Okay, Liz, he'd said, incapable of any more words, incapable of feeling anything except a thudding heart, which meant the start of something, even though he didn't know what. He took her to the cafe where everyone met before going to the dance halls. Choruses of, "Hey, Frank," and "Frankie, my boy," and "Frank, darling." And Liz let it all happen, sat quietly, smoothing her skirt. Classy. But when he came back with their coffees and put them down on the table, she let her hand cover his, stilling him for a second, and said, "I mean it, I don't put up with nonsense." It was implicit that she meant the women who were batting their eyelashes, swooning over his film star looks, the groupies who hung back after his gigs. She made him want to be better. She saw past the dark shadow of his dad, the scars he'd etched in him. "You'll never be good enough" was now looking like it could be a lie. Was it? Could he pull this off, this relationship thing? He could see the future stretching out before him like a never-ending ribbon of time, and he wondered, for the first time, if he could navigate it and make it to the end and be happy along the way. Liz sipped her coffee, her pale blue eyes holding his gaze steadily. He knew she would always be the strongest of the two of them. And the next one is, we see, if I can just find it, we see Frank now, it's further on in their marriage, and he now has 2 children. And this is a scene of Frank with his children, and it's called "Not All Heroes Wear Capes." Today, Frank's showing Dawn and John how to be superheroes. He'd caught John that morning as he went to call him for breakfast, hiding under his blankets, and he could see a torchlight shining under there. There was a circle like the misterons from Captain Scarlet penetrating through. He'd crept into the room slowly, stifling a laugh. Then he'd bipped John on top of the head, eliciting giggles. "What you reading, sport?" he'd asked, and John had made him sit for 5 minutes while he showed him what Superman was up to this week. "You know you don't have to hide under the covers with a torch, don't you?" Frank asked. "It's morning, it's light out." He pulled open the curtains, proving it. "I know, Dad, but Superman likes danger. Do you like danger?" Frank hadn't known how to answer that. He didn't think he liked danger, but for a while now, behind Liz's back, he'd been doing some pretty dangerous things. Now, in the back garden with both John and Dawn, he fastens their matching anoraks using just the one top button. As he adjusts their hoods, his face is right up against theirs. Both have jam around their mouths. Both have the widest, bluest eyes. Both have snotty noses and hot breath, and he imagines their little hearts beating inside their chests. He closes his eyes and wants to hold on to this feeling that their hearts are all intact, even as he realizes he'll probably break them both in 2. "Don't put your arms in. This is a superhero's cape," he tells them, and his voice is thick. "Where's yours, Daddy?" Dawn asks him, blinking the long eyelashes he'd first seen when she was seconds old. She'll never need fake lashes when she's older. He feels a cold hand clutch at his heart, compress his chest. It's like the draft from those batting lashes has knocked him over. "I don't need one. Only superheroes need them. That's what you 2 are. You can do anything. You're both amazing." "But you are a superhero, Daddy." Dawn smiles and finds his hand with her little one, sticky with something, but he doesn't care. "You're our hero." He wants to reply. He wants to tell them they shouldn't look up to a man like him, a weak man, but he doesn't, because being strong in their eyes is all he has left. And next, just 2 little micros to follow now. One is from the care home, and this is called Loss. This man who changed your nappies now smells faintly of piss and has lost his false teeth. It's tea time. Relatives sit with people they once made love to or suckled at the breast of. Loss is bleeding from them. Pudding comes and Dad returns briefly. He remembers cake. At the first spoonful, he pulls his frail hand into a fist. Yes, lovely. And some core cells in you want to grab his finger with your own fist and never let go. And finally, the title chapter, Only About Love. When you shave him, he moves his mouth and face around like he's chewing an invisible sweet. He offers up his neck with absolute trust. You glide the blade down beneath his chin and over his Adam's apple. It's massive, like he swallowed a rock. You hear the rasp of his stubble, and it's almost like the noise is coming from you, because there's sandpaper inside you. Your stomach is made of it. Your heart is made of it. Your throat. Your insides have been transformed into a million tiny pieces of rock. He can no longer speak, but words are unnecessary. Life is now simple in its cruelty. He once cared for you, and now you're caring for him. Each touch of your fingers on his skin reminds him that love still exists. You want all his waking thoughts from now on to be only about love. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Debbie. We're going to have David now. David?
Hi, hello. Hi. Okay, well, thanks for inviting me, Gaynor. It's lovely to be here. Lots of familiar faces. Right, who am I? Well, I'm actually speaking to you from Spain at the moment. I've lived in Spain for the last 22 years, in fact. And I'll come back to that in a moment because it's kind of interesting in my story, I think. Unlike Gaynor, I do have an MA in creative writing, but I did it when I was very, very young. At university, I was a musician, and for 2 or 3 years after university. And when I kind of gave up on that, I sent the first 3 stories that I'd ever written to UEA. And got a place there, and I got there and I was very young and very out of my depth, and I was there like a sort of rabbit in the headlights, really, and got quite discouraged, and then sort of gave up creative writing, really. I just decided that if I were anything, I might be a poet, but I was certainly not a novelist of any description. And in the lots of years passed, and I did lots of professional writing, sort of course books, textbooks, e-learning modules and things like that. And then in 2017, I discovered that, a bit like Debbie, I discovered the ad hoc fiction thing quite by chance online, the 150 word thing. And I had a couple of goes at those and got into the little e-book. Didn't win, nobody voted for me. But then as a result of that, I saw the Bath Flash Fiction Award. And thought, oh, 300 words, I can do that. And I did that and was lucky enough to win 3rd prize there. And through that, I met Jude Higgins from, the Bath, everybody knows Jude, right? And she introduced me to Writer Twitter. So having been an expatriate, living abroad and feeling very remote from any form of writing community, suddenly she sort of plugged me in, and I discovered a whole world of people writing and sharing and that sort of thing. And so I was very, I felt less alone, I guess. And then I saw, like most of you, I think, Charmaine Wilkinson's How to Make a Window Snake, and saw the Novella Prize. And I thought, right, that's what I need to do. I can have a go at that, and started to write for that. And a bit again like Debbie, I wrote my first, this one, can you see that with the thing, the Russia book, The Last Days of the Union, right, about the end of the Cold War. And I entered that and was shortlisted in 2019, and Michael Loveday was the judge that year, and he said, okay, I like it, but it's unfinished, it's rough around the edges, you need to polish it. but ad hoc are interested if you can kind of improve it. So I did that. Didn't really finish, and then I couldn't send it to the Bath Novella the following year, 2020, because Michael was the judge again. Of course, he knew the work, he knew it quite well by then. So I sent another thing and shortlisted again with the other thing. But still close, but no cigar. And then in 2021, by this time, the thing had changed enormously. And Jupiter, she's here. Hello, Jupiter. Hi, my Jupiter Jones. And we've been kind of writers buddies since, I don't know, 2019 or around there. And she read it, gave me lots of fantastic advice and so on. And the third year it shortlisted, the judge was Michelle Elvey, and it wasn't her cup of tea and didn't win a prize. But Jude wrote to me and said, look, we like it and we want to publish it. So, ba-bam, Porfin, okay? Perseverance, resilience, never give up. That's the first message. But I was still left with this feeling I really need to win something. And then a bit like buses, that you wait and wait and wait, you try and try and try, and then suddenly two at once. And that's how we come to the Monsieur. So just as the last days of the Union was sort of in the pipeline, suddenly I got this wonderful email saying, you're shortlisted. And then I got this second email saying, you've won first prize. And I went, oh my God, so it is possible, So again, perseverance, resilience. Monsieur, the story, was absolutely written for that competition. I mean, 8,000 words, and I sat down and I thought, what do I do? 8,000 words. And I had a sort of treatment for what I hoped would one day be a longer novel, a full-length novel. And I planned it very, very carefully, very meticulously, because I was always felt I was weak on story. So I did, I read about the snowflake method, and I read about, various books about plotting and that sort of thing. And I made this plan, and I thought maybe one day I'll write it. And then I thought, right, I'm going to do it like that. And I wrote it quite literally on my phone. Okay, the first draft, the whole thing with two thumbs, And then I divided it into 25 chapters and gave them sort of Roman numerals. And I think at that stage, it wasn't really a novella in flash. It was kind of like a long short story, really, or a very, very short novel. And then, again, Jupiter read it and loved, loved, I don't know, she loved it, but she said she loved I think she said something about the bawdiness and the fact that it was a kind of a romp. It was a thing with a lot of story, and then because I was working with Jude at that time on my other book, I asked her, would you like to read it? And she did, and I asked her three very specific things. Would she read it as a woman, because the narrator is a female voice, and so obviously I needed help with that, and also for her general comments. And she said something about wanting to hear more of the narrator's voice. I mean, obviously we hear the narrator's voice in narration, but to hear her speak more, and necessarily because she's I don't know how many of you know the book, because she's a woman disguised as a man in a very male environment. Her best strategy was to stay quiet, but of course that's not very dramatic in fiction for it to have a silent character, So I looked for opportunities to put more dialogue, gave the sections titles, and things started to click. As for the story itself, both of my books are historical novellas in flash, both based on real life stories. And this particular one is based on the life of Jeanne Barrette, who really lived. You can find her in Wikipedia, as I did. And quite literally, she She's a remarkable woman. She was a sort of herbalist or whatever, a wise woman gardener, trained by her mother, and she got into the company of this aristocratic French botanist, and he sort of really took lots of know-how and lots of knowledge from her, and really sort of sold it as his own, I think. But they were also lovers, and they traveled together around the world, and obviously sort of tensions arose both with her position on the ship as a woman in disguise, and the fact that he could protect her only up to a certain point, and she became very very vulnerable, right? So anyway, that's the story, and I'm just going to read you about 150 words, the first chapter, for 1 minute, right? Yeah, and this is called A Libertine. Bear in mind, this is not me. This is a 17th or 18th century woman. Okay, so A Libertine. I tell Monsieur that if I were a man, I'd be a libertine, immune to the chains of propriety, like old Voltaire, with whom he stayed a full year in Geneva, surviving on a diet of Spartan roots and brandy, talking rights and privileges, debating the true age of the earth. I'd be the type who'd think herself immune to censure, a little like you, I say, inspecting with the aid of an enlarging glass the pink tips of his nipples 6 times life. You're quite the rascal, John, he says, inviting me to straddle him and bounce about in his lap, grasping tight the pink whorls of his ears, a little clumsily, it's true, for we've been drinking absinthe, and my head is fuzzy, my fingers sticky with the juice of oysters, slapdash in the sluice of love. We are together in the hothouse, naked as the day. Madame is somewhere in the house, her heavy belly fat as the full moon, with little Archambault about to slip between her legs into this wretched and uneven earth. But still, we toast her absence, our good fortune, quite as carelessly as sunbeams fate the air, engaging in depravity and caring not one jot, because one must, in this unequal world, be free. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you. It's really interesting to hear about like the different voices and the settings and things like that are coming through these different books. Thank you so much. So Hannah is also in the same book. So I'm going to hand over to Hannah now.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gaynor, for organising this and asking me to come along. So I've got 2 Novella and flashes published. My first one is Small Things. So that was highly commended in the Bath Novella competition in 2021. So it's almost been out for a year. And then I have my novelette in Flash as the second story in this book, which came out earlier this year. So I kind of dabble in a lot of different kind of styles of writing. I'm on about my 50th redraft of a comedy novel that I've been working on for a very long time. And I'm hoping that it will be done at some point soon. And I've just finished another novella in Flash, which I just need to improve a lot before anybody is allowed to read it. And I would say that the novella in Flash is definitely what I enjoy writing the most, just because of the freedom it kind of offers, which you wouldn't think because of the word limit. But I just think that you can just experiment so much more with it, with point of view, with characters. I like to kind of play around with whether I'm writing in first person, second person, third person, and I try and make each character. So in Small Things, the mum was in second person. The main character, his point of view was in third person, and then they had 3 in first person. And I've tried to kind of do that with Ceiling as well. the unnamed preteen narrator, everything is kind of in first person, but she's speaking to her sister. And it's quite, I've tried to put a little bit of comedy in there as well, and tried to really kind of get into the character, because she is quite witty, I think, and how she kind of views the world, to kind of break up the darker elements of the narrative, which are told in third person, for Kerry, who is the unnamed narrator's mother, and how she's suffering from a loss, but you don't really know which loss until the end of the book. And her older sister, Nee, features heavily as well. And she's got an eating disorder that you don't actually see until the very end. The title Ceiling kind of comes from the opening chapter that I'm going to read, talks about how the girls' potential in life, their teacher tells them it's limitless. There is no ceiling to their learning. They just continue to grow and grow and grow, bust through the ceiling, and they can do anything that they want in the world. And then it kind of, as the book unravels against quite a grim backdrop, you kind of see that unfortunately circumstances mean that there is kind of a ceiling to what they can achieve in life. And with the sister's eating disorder, it kind of, hopefully that theme kind of comes through the book as well. All of my writing is set in the northeast of Scotland, which is where I'm from, and it's written kind of how I speak. There's no reason for it other than I just feel very comfortable and very at home writing in that, and that's just what I want to write. So I hope that kind of pays off as well. I think I'll just start reading because we're right. So the first flash piece is called Limitless, and this is told in the unnamed narrator's, this is from her point of view. We're in the car, but we don't know where we're going. You slide your forefinger down the condensation on the car window and draw a very sad face, then swipe it across with your palm. I close my eyes and pray, even though none of us is religious, but maybe we should be, because he's taken his hands off the steering wheel, losing control, then gaining it, just as a car comes speeding towards us. It feels like we're inflating balloons before a birthday party, filling them with air, being cocky wee shites, chancing our luck as they grow and grow, then right before the pop, we just stop blowing and the balloon deflates. It's exactly like that, only without the birthday cake. Oh, you pair are so fucking boring, Dad goes, which is a blatant lie because you're definitely not. I don't think I'm boring either. I'm 11 and 11-year-olds are never boring, so Miss Cox says. She says we are the future and there's no such thing as reaching our potential because there's no ceiling to our learning. Our potential is limitless. She tells us to imagine ourselves as wee seeds buried deep in soil, and with all this learning she keeps giving us, we grow and grow and grow through the ceiling, busting our potential. You can do anything, she exclaims from the front of the class, with her hands extended to us like she's grasping at the imaginary stems and willing them up to the sky. Tears in her eyes, looking at us like she just fucking loves us all, like we're these magnificent beings who can do absolutely anything. Ugh, funny old Miss Cox, the dreamer. And then that's kind of next to the next chapter, which is in Kerry's point of view, so that's the mum, and it's called Limited, and I'll just read it, it's very short. So it says, Kerry keeps his woolen jumper in a Tesco bag at the back of the wardrobe. She wears it to bed sometimes when she wants to feel close to him. It scratches her skin and brings it out blotchy. She doesn't seem to care. So the mum's stories are very small and kind of in between, and the kind of, it unravels as the novel goes on about actually what's going on there. Yeah, that's me done, I think.
Thank you, Hannah. And I think what's so interesting with people that haven't read it yet is the structure of it is quite complex, and it contrasts really well with that sort of like colloquial voice and like sort of swearing on the jokes. It's a really interesting way that it's been written. Brill. And now we're on to Philip. Philip, you okay?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me and inviting me. I've loved hearing work from everyone else. I've read some of the novels and will be visiting those that I haven't. I'm in a bit of a novella in flash mode in a moment. I'm writing one, reading one, and this is, I don't know if you can see this very well. That's my novella in Flash, 15 Brief Moments in Time, that came out with V-Press this year. I thought I'd do something a bit different and read a very short extract first and then explain second. So here we go. This comes from the middle of the book. Luca Kangemi and everyone he knows will long be dead, but the moment will come. Theoretical physicists believe it will be anywhere from 2.8 to 22 billion years in the future. In that moment, everything reverses. The Big Crunch is a cosmological event in our future and our past, in which the density of matter grows sufficiently that gravitational attraction overcomes the expansion that began with the Big Bang. Entropy reverses, and the second law is broken. Chaos retreats. Order is regained as space contracts. Broken rocks reform, and decayed bodies reanimate. We live our lives in reverse, unexperiencing everything we did the first time around, moving backwards, shrinking towards birth. Instead of questions about creation, we search for the harbinger of order. Who began this? What is our final form? Luca imagines the crowds at his book signings dissipating and the offices of his academic fellowships decreasing in size. Wrong turns are righted and his family grows closer. His briefcase heals itself and he returns it to his mother. Life rewinds back to him as a young boy, unreading the words that inspired him to look for the meaning in all of this. If it can all be reversed, are all shared experiences undone? All bonds broken? Luca returns into his parents, then ancestors, apes, microbes, and nothing. The earth, the planets, and stars all merge into one perfectly ordered mass. Yet, this is not an end, but another beginning, in which the universe is reborn in another bang. Galaxies, planets, plants, and philosophy professors will live the same lives as they did billions of years before and after. The process of positive and negative entropy repeats, and we all make the same mistakes again. Time elapsed, the infinitely repeating cycle of a universe. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so as I said, that is a short flash from the middle of the book, and it features the main character who is a philosophy professor giving a lecture. Basically, the structure of the book, I like to think of it as like a wheel. It has a central character and a theme, which is time, and it explores different the lives of and the possible futures of lots of other different characters who are also listening to the lecture. Yeah, and I've been thinking a bit about shape, and that's one thing that I really love about the novella in Flash, is a novel is often a journey. We think of it as a road or, you know, a hero's journey, a typical novel, and the novella in Flash can just be so many different shapes. I agree with, you know, what Hannah said about it being so versatile. You could have, you know, triangles, squares, circles, 3D shapes. I'm working on something at the moment that is perhaps rings which are connected, so sort of circular stories as well. Yeah, and I just love this idea of working with stories that are different shapes and not just from point A to point B. So that's one thing that really attracts me about it. You know, I speak about all this like I'm some kind of master at putting together novellas in Flash. I didn't even know what one was when I wrote this book. It came about because I thought I want to write a set of stories about time. And then I realized even writing one good short story about time is really time consuming and difficult. And there's no way I can put together like 20 of them. I'd sort of tried with a previous theme to write a collection, And with a novella in Flash, you can work to a theme. There are various other novellas which explore particular themes rather than being based just on a character or on a chronology. And so I started to put this book together in 2020 and sort of wrote it in one go, just a load of random stories about time. And then as I did a bit of research and listened to podcasts and read stuff about what time actually is, yeah, I thought of this idea to tie everything together like a lecture. And this character of this Italian philosophy professor was born, who is based in part on an actual Italian professor of time or physicist, I suppose. Yeah, and so I wrote the book. I submitted it for a couple of competitions, and I think it was longlisted in the Reflex competition. So that was in 2021. Yeah, and that gave me the motivation to submit it. And after a few changes and tweaks, it was published this year with V Press. And it was really nice to work together with them and get the experience of, you know, working with an editor and seeing what kind of changes could make the book even better. So that's it from me, really. Very quick one, but hope you enjoyed the reading.
But so much was said in that tiny space that my mind was boggled.
I'm a teacher, so I'm an expert at rushing everything in the last 5 minutes, don't worry.
No, it's great. It just shows the absolute variety and the scope that is in these books. And thank you so much. I am not going to read from mine, but I am just going to say a couple of things about mine because I think they might be useful or just interesting, really. The first thing is that it was reduced on special offer to £1 a year ago, and Steve forgot to change it back to full price. So it's £1 if you want it. And I just thought, I'm not going to tell him. He's got enough on his plate. Mine's called Among These Animals. Basically, I was writing a lot of flash fiction, and for no reason that I could see, I'd written 3 pieces set on a farm. And I just thought one day, imagine, why shouldn't I just set everything else on a farm? Like whatever idea comes into my head for a flash fiction, bung it onto a farm. And then I might end up with a novella in Flash. So that's what I started doing. Where I grew up, I spent every other weekend with my dad, and he lived next to a farm. So I guess it was sort of coming from there. My novella in Flash is very image heavy, and I did that deliberately. I'm not the best with like fancy language, and so I had to like force myself. So if you read it, the alternating images are sheep and eggs that comes up in I don't know if it quite alternates, but it's either about sheep or it's about eggs as you read it, and that sort of made me chuckle as I was going through it. I forced that in. I wrote it on a course with Michael Loveday. So it feels very collaborative to me. I feel like I owe a lot to Michael, even though I was writing the pieces. He was coming up with the prompts to get me going, and he was giving me feedback on the pieces. So I feel like I 80% wrote it and Michael 20% wrote it, and he'll tell me off for saying that and say that's not true. But that's how it felt to me because I'd never worked collaboratively with anyone before. I was really lucky. The one thing that I wanted to say, which only me and Michael and Steve know, is that it was a completely different book until I had a meltdown about 8 weeks before I was meant to hand it in for publication. It's a historical flash fiction. It's set in Wales, South Wales, from the 1960s to the 1980s. And it was originally completely about the Aberfan disaster. So for those of you that might not know it, in 1966, there was an awful accident in South Wales where a mine collapsed and buried a school, and like over 100 children were killed. So I'm Welsh, first of all, and it was something that I realized that people didn't know because there was an episode of a TV show called The Crown, and everyone popped up on Twitter saying, I'd never heard of this, I'd never heard of the Aberfan disaster. And I was like, how can you never have heard of it? So that sort of became what my novella in Flash was about. It split into 3 parts, and part 2 was entirely about that. And then and then I was happy with it. I'd written it, I'd completed it. Michael had fed back on it. We thought it was a good book. And then because I struggle with anxiety, I had an absolute meltdown about the responsibility of writing about not just real people, but like such a tragic event, and also people that were still alive, you know, people are still alive that were affected by it. And I remember I rang Michael, and I was really in tears, and he was like trying to talk me down, and he was saying, you've handled it ethically, you know, you've handled it really well, there's nothing insensitive, you researched it, this, that, and the other. And I just went to bed one night and I thought, I can't do it because it's going to be published. I had a contract with Ellipsis, and I thought, I can't do it because I won't feel comfortable publicizing it. So there's this whole other version that exists I've never really spoken about, but I had to do what was right for me and what was right in my gut and in my heart. So then I had this moment of, I was like, okay, you know, what can I do with this book? So what I did was, instead of making it about a wider tragedy, it then became about just one tragedy within a family. And I actually think it's a stronger book for that. I think it works better. But I also think you can sort of extrapolate, if you know the history of Wales as you're reading it, you can sort of see that I think what happens in the book is sort of symbolic of the wider things that were going on. It's told from the viewpoint of Caris, the daughter, and Derfel, the father. And when people review it or tell me about it, they often forget about poor Derfel, whereas to me, he was the central character, like much as in Debbie's book, a lot of it was coming from sort of personal experience and memories. Yeah, so I am proud of it, but I'm also proud that I made that decision not to publish something that I wasn't 100% behind. And I think that's worth noting. If you are ever feeling like that or having a bit of a wobble, it's okay to like stop and interrogate yourself. And I feel like it would have been okay if I did publish it as well. But just for me personally, I'm happier with the decision that I made. So yeah, Among These Animals, it is quite a sad book still, so don't read it if you're already feeling quite sad. But, slightly happy moments, and a bit like Hannah's, like I've got like a sort of cheeky young character in it who likes to swear and likes to, you know, mess about and things. So yeah, well, I don't know about you, but I actually really enjoyed tonight, and I'm thinking I might do it again in a few months' time with some different yeah, feel free to go. Anyone who needs to go, it's totally fine, but also feel free to hang around if you want to. I might do it again in a few months with some different novella in Flash authors, because I just like hearing like what people are writing about, how they wrote it, any ideas. So with that in mind, if anybody does want to ask anything, just indicate to me somehow. You can wave at me or you can post something in the chat. We'll just give a couple of minutes in case anyone wants to ask anything. Yeah, I posted everybody's books in the chat, so those links will be there. But I'll also, probably not tonight, but tomorrow, I'll like make sure they're on Twitter and on our Retreat West community page as well. It's really interesting to hear what everybody does and like what they're writing. And I've also written another cheeky novella in Flash. I think they're quite addictive, aren't they? I think, yeah, I can see people nodding.
They are.
Yeah, they are. I wrote one when I had a breakdown about my novel not working, and then I took half of it out because it was a dual timeline, submitted it to the Bristol Prize, got a notable contender, took it back, put it back in the novella in Flash.
Oh gosh.
So now I'm like, it's like a choose your own adventure. Is it going to be a short story? Is it going to be a novella in Flash? We don't know. I shouldn't really be sneaking off to write them, but you just can't help it. And like Among These Animals is only 12,000 words as well. It's really short. I mean, it didn't take me a month, Debbie. When you said it took you a month to write the extra 10,000
yeah, but it was a very intense month where I didn't do anything else.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I'm actually writing a novel, but it's a novel in Flash. I'm making it a long piece of work, but using, you know, flashy chapters. So it's how I prefer to write now. Like people said, you know, it's addictive. It's addictive to write in Flash. It gives you a lot of freedom to do. And nowadays, anything goes, doesn't it? You've got, you know, the success of Charmaine's novel, which is written in short Flash chapters, Black Cake. You know, it's just amazing what you can do.
Yeah,
if you just
absolutely.
experiment with it, you know.
It is. I do like sneaking off to write a flash, although it's hard, and you know, but it's not as hard as trying to write an awful novel. I can't see any questions coming in. I can't see anybody waving at me. Oh, hang on, I've got one.
There's a question.
So do you feel, so this like sort of unmute and whoever wants to answer it, do you feel it's important to get parts of the novella published as a sort of promotion for the project, as a way to persuade publishers? One piece in mine was published that changed a little bit, but for me it didn't come into play. I don't know about anybody else, if your pieces were like published already.
It wasn't a factor with mine really. One or two pieces ended up being published, but it didn't influence anyone particularly. But no, I don't think it's a huge part of it. I think oddly, even though they are novella and flash, there's a sort of limit to how they really stand alone as flashes. I found that they do lean against each other a little bit, so it's kind of hard to pick one out. They work, they are stories, it's not cheating, but somehow without the others around them, I found, at least for mine, but I write a sort of quite a linear narrative, so that they do sort of tilt against each other, but not getting them published in advance wasn't a factor on my side anyway.
I mean, one of Tom's pieces in his Retreat West book, it doesn't even have any words in it, it's just a title.
And this is true.
So
that one entirely leans on the one before and
one.
after. Yeah, that doesn't do a lot of standalone work, although I guess the title could be called a story, but yeah.
I think there is some leeway. Like, I don't think all of mine stand alone 100%, definitely not. But
it's when you go through them trying to find one to send somewhere, you say, I can't really send that one. Oh, good, 39 of them later, I can't send any of them. You know, so it's a bit like that.
Anybody else? Sudash, you want to say something about that?
Oh, I just went reverse. So I had something published first, and then I worked up from there. So I don't know about the promotion bit. That question, I think there was a word promotion in that question. I'm not sure about the promotion, but I think it helped me to know that this will stand, that it is something that's publishable. That's something people might like to read. That's about all. Yeah.
And
I had three out of that novella published before I put the whole thing together.
I don't think I think especially if you're entering competitions, they're completely anonymous as well. So there's no way of knowing really when it's being judged. It's just one of those things where you've got to get like the right first readers and then the right judge seeing the final book. Yeah. Does anybody else, David or Philip or Hannah, have any thoughts on that?
No, in my case, no. Certainly because I'd spent so long, with novellas and flash. One thing Jude said to me is, "Why don't you send bits of it so that people know who you are when the book comes out?" And I, a bit like Tom, I kind of went through it and, nah, not that one, and desisted really.
Hannah?
None of mine were previously published in the two novellas and flash, although I did enter them into the Bath competitions, but I think, like you guys are saying, they just didn't kind of stand alone without the rest of the story. But the voice in Sealing, the unnamed narrator, that was actually a short story that was shortlisted in the Bridport Prize. So I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay. I don't like it. It's not finished as a short story. I was like, that's kind of, let's play around with it. And I added bits and split it up and put the mum's voice in. But originally it was a short story to begin with. So I think, the listing in the competition kind of does give you the confidence boost that there's something there. Just need to have another look at it, see if there's a different way that it can be presented.
But equally, Dawn, the third author in Monsieur, she hadn't had anything published anywhere at all, and she just won third prize with this book that she'd just written. She came out of nowhere with it, so I think it sort of works either way. Yeah, brilliant. I can't see any more questions, and it's getting close to my tacky reality TV show that I'm addicted to at 9 o'clock.
Which is that? What's that, Gaynor?
I've got memory problems. Married at First Sight.
Oh, I see. I thought so. Yeah.
So I've had a very intellectual hour, and now I'm going for a very.
Now you've earned it. You've earned your trash TV
hour.
now.